The trade landscape between the United States, Canada, and Mexico has undergone significant changes as of March 6, 2025, with escalating tensions resulting from newly imposed tariffs and subsequent diplomatic negotiations. On March 4, 2025, U.S. President Donald Trump implemented a sweeping 25% tariff on imports from Canada and Mexico, citing concerns over insufficient measures to prevent the flow of fentanyl into the United States. Additionally, a separate 10% tariff was imposed specifically on Canadian energy exports, including oil and natural gas, further intensifying trade frictions. In response, Canada retaliated swiftly, announcing an immediate 25% tariff on $30 billion worth of American goods, with plans to extend these measures to an additional $125 billion in the coming weeks. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau strongly condemned the U.S. tariffs, labeling them as unjustified and harmful to both economies. He reaffirmed Canada's commitment to maintaining its retaliatory measures until the U.S. government lifts its own tariffs. Furthermore, Canada has formally requested consultations with the United States at the World Trade Organization, WTO, initiating the first step in the organization's dispute resolution process. Meanwhile, the trade tensions with Mexico took a different trajectory. Following diplomatic discussions between President Trump and Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum, the U.S. government agreed to a temporary one-month pause on the 25% tariffs for most imports from Mexico, effective until April 2, 2025. This decision was made in recognition of Mexico's increased efforts to curb illegal immigration and drug trafficking, particularly in relation to fentanyl. President Sheinbaum expressed her gratitude for the cooperation between the two nations and reassured that Mexico remains committed to addressing border security and migration challenges. However, while Mexico received a temporary reprieve, the tariffs on Canadian exports remain firmly in place, leaving Canada's government in a difficult position as it prepares to escalate its response. Ontario Premier Doug Ford has taken a particularly aggressive stance in countering the U.S. tariffs, announcing that the province will impose a 25% tariff on electricity exports to the United States starting Monday, March 10, 2025. This measure is expected to impact approximately 1.5 million American homes and businesses, particularly in states like Michigan, New York, and Minnesota, which rely on Ontario's electricity supply. Premier Ford did not shy away from emphasizing Ontario's willingness to take further action if necessary, stating, "I won't hesitate to increase this surcharge or, if necessary, shut the electricity off completely." His warning signals Ontario's readiness to escalate its retaliatory measures in the event that the U.S. refuses to reconsider its trade policies. Premier Ford reinforced this message during a press conference, cautioning that Ontario might go as far as suspending all electricity exports to key U.S. states that depend heavily on Canadian energy imports. His words carried a sense of urgency as he declared, "If they're trying to destroy Ontario, I will do whatever it takes, including cutting off their power supply," with a smile. His rhetoric underscores the severity of the trade dispute and the extent to which Ontario is prepared to respond to Trump's trade decisions. Beyond electricity exports, Ontario is considering additional retaliatory measures. One such measure includes imposing a surcharge on each megawatt of electricity sold to the United States, which would inevitably raise costs for American businesses and consumers. Ford has also threatened to cancel a $100 million contract with Elon Musk's Starlink satellite internet company, further escalating tensions in the business sector. Additionally, Ontario's Liquor Control Board is expected to remove all U.S. alcohol from its stores in response to the tariffs, signaling a broad-based effort to reduce economic reliance on American goods. The economic consequences of these trade policies are substantial, with analysts warning of potential job losses and rising costs for both businesses and consumers in Canada. Ontario, as Canada's industrial heartland, is particularly vulnerable to the effects of these tariffs. In preparation for potential economic fallout, the provincial government has set aside over $40 billion in economic relief, including a $5 billion Protect Ontario account, tax deferrals, payroll subsidies, and direct municipal support. This significant financial commitment highlights the gravity of the situation and reflects the proactive approach taken by Ontario's government to safeguard its economy. Despite these preparations, Premier Ford acknowledged the unpredictability of Trump's trade policies, stating, "We don't know what's coming tomorrow. I'm not even sure President Trump knows what's coming tomorrow." His remark captures the uncertainty surrounding U.S. trade policy under the current administration, as businesses and policymakers on both sides of the border brace for further developments. The Canadian federal government has also pledged to match U.S. trade actions with equal countermeasures. Ford has supported a dollar-for-dollar response strategy, meaning that any tariffs imposed by the United States will be met with an equivalent response from Canada. Although Ford stopped short of announcing specific provincial-level tariffs beyond the electricity measures, his willingness to escalate the situation suggests that Ontario is prepared to take drastic action if necessary. Meanwhile, Canadian Member of Parliament Charlie Angus has voiced strong opposition to the U.S. tariffs and President Trump's rhetoric regarding Canada. In a recent address, Angus called for a national boycott of American products, urging Canadians to support local businesses and reduce their dependence on U.S. goods. His call to action reflects broader concerns about protecting Canadian economic interests amid worsening trade tensions. Angus has also responded to Trump's repeated suggestions about annexing Canada as the 51st U.S. state. He firmly rejected these notions, emphasizing Canada's sovereignty and independence. In a recent interview, he stated, "Canada is a proud nation with its own identity, and we will not entertain any ideas that compromise our sovereignty." Additionally, Angus has sponsored a parliamentary petition urging the Canadian government to bar President Trump from attending the upcoming G7 summit in June. While this proposal has gained traction among some lawmakers, former diplomats have warned that excluding the U.S. president from the summit could damage the cohesion and effectiveness of the G7. As one of the world's largest economies, the United States relies heavily on imports across various critical sectors, including energy, raw materials, food, and skilled labor. However, under President Trump's America First policy, trade relationships with key allies, including Canada, the European Union, and China, have faced increasing strain. The administration has imposed tariffs and trade restrictions aimed at boosting domestic industries, but these policies often overlook the complexities of global supply chains, which have been built over decades of economic interdependence. The U.S. does not only import consumer goods, it also depends on foreign resources such as crude oil, rare earth minerals, electricity, and other essential materials for its industrial and technological development. In response to the Trump administration's tariffs, Canada is considering countermeasures beyond standard trade penalties. One of the most impactful proposals is restricting oil and electricity exports to the United States, a move that could disrupt crucial energy supply chains. Given Canada's significant role in fulfilling U.S. energy demands, such an action could have severe consequences for industries that rely on a stable power supply. Canada is also exploring potential restrictions on rare earth element exports, which are vital for sectors such as defense, aerospace, and renewable energy. These measures would add another layer of economic pressure on the U.S., particularly in industries that depend on Canadian-supplied resources. Beyond retaliation, Canada is actively seeking to diversify its energy exports to reduce its dependence on the U.S. market. The completion of the Trans Mountain Expansion, TMX, pipeline in early 2024 has allowed Canadian crude oil to be shipped directly to Asian markets, particularly China and Japan. Alberta's energy exports to China have surged in the past year, and Japanese refiners have also increased their imports of Canadian crude oil and natural gas. This shift in energy trade demonstrates Canada's commitment to reducing its vulnerability to U.S. trade policies. Despite its status as a major energy producer, the U.S. remains dependent on Canadian energy imports to meet regional and industrial demands. The Trump administration's tariffs, however, threaten to disrupt this delicate balance. Some analysts argue that these trade measures may be driven by strategic objectives beyond economic concerns, potentially aiming to pressure Canada into aligning more closely with U.S. geopolitical interests. Ultimately, as tensions continue to rise, the impact of these trade policies will be felt on both sides of the border, leaving businesses, workers, and policymakers uncertain about the future of North American trade.